Let's get started. So, a couple of quick words. So, you can mute your ears if you've heard me say this 1,000 times together. What Wheel and Anchor is all about is bringing travelers together. What that means, we are a unique community of travelers from all across Canada and a small handful that come from other places who really have a what I like to say is a like-minded approach to travel. Whether you are someone who is new to travel, you haven't done a lot of travel in your life, or you're extremely well traveled, but travel is for me all about sort of the curiosity of experiencing what life is like in other parts of the world. And there's so many facets to that. I could talk for 2 hours on a webinar, but the essence of that, the vibe that we have on our trips is unique because we make a big effort for everyone to sort of get to know each other, to relate to each other as if you're traveling with a group of friends. And generally, we pull that off sort of 90% of the time based on feedback from our members. Because when you travel with people that you know or that you feel like you have something in common with, you're able to sort of open up more, share the experiences, go out and have a few laughs, because we try to incorporate more free time than average on a lot of our trips. Enables you to be able to sort of go for someone for a glass of wine, or maybe for a bike ride, or walk down the canal in the case of the Canal du Midi. Whatever that may be, that's the essence of Wheel and Anchor and what we're all about. And I've been organizing trips for a long time for Canadians, and this is the key part of the dynamic that we have that's, I think, unique to Wheel and Anchor. Of course, inside of all of that, the goal is for you to be well traveled. When we say well traveled, it's sometimes less is more, and I say that because we try very consciously to be have our trips not not try to do everything. We're never going to see everything there is to see in our lives. The world is too big. There's too many places. There's too much out there. But to give you the best experience, such that when you leave a place and when you look back on it, you feel connected to it in some way, because it's that sort of connection that I think if the world as a whole were better well traveled and we were all a little bit more connected, we wouldn't see the kind of conflict that unfortunately seems to befall us on an ongoing basis. So that's our goal inside of Wheel and Anchor, hopefully we'll achieve that. So I'll just share with you a quick snapshots from our trip last year. In 2022, we went down the canal with 3 boats. We had an absolute blast. So, this picture, I think, in a way says it all in terms of what the experience is aboard. We are on, and I'll tell you about the boats in a minute. We're on these canal boats, purpose-built for the Canal du Midi. And so they have in most cases, 4 cabins, 4 bedrooms with bathrooms on board. And we have one captain or host with us. You can see Hank in the middle of the picture, who's assisting one of our members. So that's part of the fun of this way to experience the Canal du Midi is that you can take your hand at the wheel as well. We go at the end of the season in late September because there's a lot less traffic on the canal, and the boats only travel at about 7 or 8 knots. So literally, it's like if you're biking along, you typically are biking faster than the boat is going. So which just enables you to savor this sort of scenery as we go along. We stop at some beautiful places. Here in the background is Carcassonne, the medieval city, which is actually the place where we embark on our ship. And there's various other towns and villages in between where we're going to go and experience kind of what the French countryside of Languedoc-Roussillon is all about. We enjoy some of our meals aboard the boat. Some of them we do off the boat at the villages and towns that we pass. But as you can see here from the smiling faces, we just generally have a lot of fun and a great time on the trip. So let me now introduce more formally our team. Again, my name is Gordon Dreger. I'm the founder of Wheel and Anchor, and I curate all of these trips that we do. And when I say curate, I want to just emphasize I'm actually sitting now in Istria in Croatia, and literally looking at all of the bits and pieces of the trips that we run here every year, to find sort of the best possible hotels, the best experiences, the best local guides. This is my mission, to bring the best possible experiences that you can get. So, you know, that's sort of my main job, if you will, within Wheel and Anchor. And of course, our broader team, which includes Paula, you can see on the screen, and Barb, our trip specialists, who ensure that you get your questions answered, and that you get to join us for the trips that interest you most and that you'd like to go on. And then, of course, we have a broader team that take care of all of the details, the organization of all of our trips. So today I'm going to take you on a little trip down the Canal du Midi, at least in pictures, which is where we're headed in September. We're also headed here, by the way, in May. And we have, I think, one boat fully committed already, and I think we still have some space for that. So if you decide you'd like to go in the spring, there is space to join us in the spring on the Canal du Midi as well. But we're also going into September, and I'll explain a little bit about what the difference is between the two seasons as we go forward. So this trip that we're doing in September, just to give you the geographical overview. So the Canal du Midi, by the way, in case you weren't aware, it was actually built during the Napoleonic era. At the time, it was one of the greatest engineering feats in the world, if you can imagine, way back then in the 17th century. The Canal du Midi connects the Atlantic Ocean, goes all the way across the southwest part of France, and empties out, or I shouldn't say empties out, because you go both ways. You can traverse Languedoc-Roussillon all the way to the Mediterranean. And so we're focused on sort of the half between Carcassonne, the medieval city, and Agde, which is down here. We start the trip in Toulouse, and then we finish up in the city of Montpellier. So this is where our trip goes. And again, the canal portion that we're focused on is this section here. It's not a huge long length of canal that we're passing through. I think it's about 60 kilometers in total, but there's so many little things to see along the way, and it's such a pleasant experience, as you'll see from our photos. So let's start with the day-by-day itinerary. So we start in Toulouse, the easiest place to fly to. When I say easy, obviously there's no direct flights from Canada to Toulouse, but you can easily access it by a connecting flight through Paris, through Frankfurt, through Paris and Frankfurt, Munich as well are the most obvious choices. For those that wish, you could, for example, fly direct to Paris and then take the TGV, the train grande vitesse, the high-speed train in France, down to Toulouse if you were planning to spend a couple of days in France and Paris before that. Either way, Toulouse is not usually on most people's list of cities to visit in France. You know, we think about Paris for obvious reasons, and Lyon, which is a trip we do subsequent to this, as well as Nice, and the Côte d'Azur, and Provence. But actually, Toulouse is I remember the first time I went, is a surprisingly beautiful city that is called the Pink City, partly because a lot of the buildings have a hue of pink to them. So it's quite a wonderful place to start the trip. In fact, if you're interested, I would almost encourage you to come in a day early and really explore the city in a bit more depth. If you're interested, because it really is worth it, particularly for aeronautics fans, because Toulouse is also the headquarters of Airbus. And when you land in Toulouse, you obviously pass by and you'll see all sort of the newest Airbus airplanes, the 380s, and all the other aircraft that they build in Toulouse. And so they have amazing aeronautics and space museum that you can find out by the airport, so near Toulouse, which almost justifies a whole extra day just to visit that if you're somebody that's interested in it. So Toulouse is where we'll spend the first day. You'll arrive in and we don't really have too much planned for the day. We're staying right in the middle of town, so you can walk all around. It's a walkable city, lots of parks, shops, restaurants, and most of all, just sort of get caught up from the jet lag. And then the next day, you'll hop on a train down to Carcassonne, which is only about 40 minutes away. So it's an easy and a quick train ride. And then when we arrive in Carcassonne, we walk to the boat. It's literally, I don't even think it says in our program 10 minutes. I'm not even sure it's 10 minutes, but it's literally right there. The train station is next to the canal, and where we hop on our boats is there. And so we'll hop into Carcassonne and then drop our stuff off at our canal boat. And then from there be able to enjoy the medieval city. So the modern city of Carcassonne is down here to the left in the picture, and the medieval city is sort of perched up here on a hill. It's a good walk. I mean, it's about a 40 to 45-minute walk up to the cité, as they call it. So we'll go up there. We'll have a little tour, and we'll have a welcome dinner at a restaurant, which last year ended up being, I shouldn't say ended up, I did visit this restaurant on my previous visits to Carcassonne, so we picked on purpose that we had a marvelous meal. We were at the Cité at dusk, so watching the sunset over the French countryside. And as I say, we'll have a chance to explore a little bit about this amazing medieval town, which of course is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it dates back to the Middle Ages. So it's really, and people travel from all over Europe just to visit Carcassonne. And for us, it's just the first stop on the trip, and a great one. And then, as I say, we'll retire for the evening to our canal boat. Let me say a few words about this experience on board the boat. And in fact, we have a short video as well that we can send you, that our trip specialist Paul or Barb can send you, that explains exactly what sort of life is like for the week on the boat. You get a bit of a sense of it from the picture here. These boats are about 42 feet long. They have 4 cabins, 2 on the foredeck and 2 in the aft deck, with ensuite cabins. You get a sense of it inside. We, although there are 4 cabins, we limit the number of our members on this trip to 6. So in other words, it's either 2 couples or 3 couples, or 2 couples and 2 singles, and with obviously the captain in addition to that. So there's 4 cabins on board, plus crew quarters that are at the bow of the ship, so there's ample space to relax either inside or on the outer decks, and so you can get a sense here. The quarters are modest. They're small, I mean, similar to any canal boat or a barge that you'll find on the Canal du Midi. And so, we pack accordingly. We try to avoid taking big, huge suitcases or anything like that, just for space, but they're comfortable enough. And again, we had a marvelous time last year. The cabins can be both heated and air conditioned, although we specifically pick the time of the year that we do, because generally you don't need either heating or air conditioning at that time of the year. So the accommodation is quite comfortable. Again, you see here the cabins, which can be configured with either double beds or twin beds. So you can, like you see here, you can have no concern about traveling along with your companion. Again, there's ample space aboard the boat. The next morning, we're going to get up and start our journey down the canal. And so, and when I say journey down the canal, is what is unique and what is exciting about this trip is this is call it audience participation. So we have our captain, who is going to be accountable for the boat. It's Hank and Audrey, who are our 2 primary captains, a lovely couple who have traveled extensively on their own canal boat throughout the canals of Europe, and they are actually originally from the Netherlands, but they both speak perfect French, and so are very familiar with this region. And so while they're driving the boat, and particularly navigating the narrow canals and the underpasses and all the rest of this, but they still need help when we enter the locks. And in fact, we pass, I think it's 43 locks between Carcassonne and Agde. And so a lot of them happen in the first few days, and sometimes they're in blocks of like 2 or 3. And so, our members will sort of throw the ropes and help us to secure the boat inside. It's not hard work, but it does require a little bit of agility. And not everybody has to participate if we've got 5 or 6 members on board, as long as a couple of people are sort of giving a hand, willing to help out. And that's part of the fun of experiencing the Canal du Midi in this way, is to sort of help along with the experience. So the first day will be kind of getting used to the boat. We're going to make our way down towards Trèbes. So we won't leave too early in the morning. We'll have breakfast aboard, which is a good point. How do we do our meals every day? We're generally always going to have sufficient sort of food and snacks on board so that we can have a nice breakfast in the morning. In cases where we arrive in a town where there is a nearby bakery or a little cafe, we might wander into town for either breakfast or lunch or dinner. So we just kind of play it by the weather, by the pace of the trip. The itinerary that we give is a little bit of a guideline in the sense that due to traffic on the canal or the timing of the locks or whatever it may be, it could get modified. And obviously our captains will make a decision on the exact program depending on various conditions. When we get into Trèbes, it's a cute little town, and towns are all kind of like this. So some of the buildings are almost ancient. They've got narrow cobblestone streets. In Trèbes, there's a lovely little olive oil producer that we will visit, and a fantastic restaurant for our first night on the canal. And again, this is particularly why I like this method of travel on the Canal du Midi, is because for the most part, we get off the boat and we experience the villages. And in some cases, they'll open the restaurant just for us, and you'll experience that French cuisine and hospitality. We make our way down, and again, this is a little bit of what it looks like as we're going down the canal. We'll pass other boats, we'll wave at other folks, or even cargo boats that are still using the canal to bring cargo from one place to the other. We'll stop. There is a pathway that goes along the canal, kind of like you see here, where if anyone opts to take a bike, we'll always take at least one bike. You can sort of bike alongside the canal boat, oftentimes quicker. It's seldom that there is more than 10 to 15 kilometers at most between locks. And of course, our captains will take you through the program for the day and say, oh, here's a great time to sort of take the bike, or even go for a walk alongside. Because, as I say, when we arrive at the locks, it typically takes anywhere from 10 minutes to half an hour to lock through, depending on the traffic in the locks. And so when we get into Puy-Chéric, actually on the way to Puy-Chéric, we'll stop at Marseillette. And here, depending on how many boats we have and how many members are joining us, we go and visit a cooking class in the little town of Cône-Minervois. I can remember the faces of our members that did this on our trip last fall, because they had a marvelous time. A little bit of wine was served, and so they got picked up and dropped off at the cooking class, and just came back raving about the wonderful experience that they had with actually an English lady that has lived in this area for about 15 years. I discovered her on my first trip to this region a couple of years back, and since then we've been delighted to bring our members for this great cooking class that gives you a little bit of a sense of French cooking, with a bit of an English influence, and a couple of glasses of wine. So what happens on this day actually is our groups will separate if we have 2 boats or more, and half will go to the cooking class, the other half will maneuver the boats down the canal, and then we'll swap. And in the end of the day, we'll end up at Puy-Chéric, which is where 3 different waterways actually cross. So the River Aude, the Régole, and the Canal du Midi. So it's really kind of interesting to see these different bodies of water and how they kind of intersect. And we'll have a light dinner at one of the restaurants in Puy-Chérique, because believe me, after the cooking class, I remember all the delicious leftovers that everybody wanted to bring back and enjoy on board the boat. So I can assure you there's not going to be a shortage of food on board, because as well, when we visit these little towns, there's little delicatessens, and you'll find some or a pâtisserie, and you'll find some sweets and some baked goods, or you'll find some ham and cheese, and everybody wants to sort of buy something and bring it back to be able to enjoy while we're cruising down the river. We'll then continue down towards Parazza, and we'll stop at a little town called Argent-Minervois, where we'll have a little visit to a 14th century castle that was dedicated to the Saint Vincent or Vincent. And there are several locks along this stretch. This is, I think, our busiest day of locks, and we'll finally arrive in Parazza, and we anticipate mooring here for the night, because up overlooking the canal, there's a big Chateau Parazza, conveniently named, that has been in the family for generations, and will be taken for a little tour of the chateau, and also brought in for their wine tasting, which once again, we had a lot of fun here. We had a snack for a wine tasting, but as I say, believe me, everybody, there was no room for dinner when we finished the wine tasting in Parazza. And they have a particular rosé here that everybody fell in love with, called Bad Rosie, and so I think more than a few bottles were brought aboard. I should mention as well that on this trip, we include all of the beverage as well. So we'll have soft drinks. There'll be ample wine for you to enjoy, as long as you're not driving. Then there'll be ample wine and even some beer for those that like that. That are all included on the trip. We continue down the canal. One of the things that the canal is famous for are the plane trees that you see here. I have to say that in certain stretches of the canal, the plane trees have been affected by a disease in recent years, so they've had to cut a bunch of them down. But luckily, there's still some stretches where the experience is exactly like this, and it's just so magical as you're chugging down the canal, and people are biking by, or maybe we're biking by, and visiting the things. My favorite stop on this day is a little town called Le Sommeil, which is one of those picture perfect villages with the little bridge going over the canal, and the boat barely fits through. It feels like we have inches on either side, as well as a 17th century aqueduct. And so some of the aqueducts that we pass over, you don't even notice, because they've been there for centuries, and so they're all overgrown. But if you take a careful look, as you go through the countryside and we head further south, it's cool, because the surrounding area is far from flat. It's quite hilly, and yet the way that this canal was designed, and if you really stop and think about it, when you look and see incredible amount of thought and engineering and surveying went into creating this canal such that it managed to go through this very hilly countryside. We will have dinner that night in the town of Capestang, which will be our stop for the day, and we'll have also a little wine tasting here as well, and then we'll make our way down towards Béziers. And Béziers is, other than Carcassonne, well, actually even including Carcassonne, is the largest city along the Canal du Midi that we'll visit. And as we come up to Béziers, we're going to hit the so-called Fonseran lock. So this is a staircase of locks. I believe there's 8 of them all in a row. And so you pull in, and obviously, because remember, this canal dates back to the 17th century, they can only allow boats to go in one direction, either down or up. So we have to be perfectly timed at the top of the Fonseran lock, and then we will gradually be locked all the way down. For those of you that are familiar with the Rideau Canal in Ottawa, it's kind of like going through those locks. There's a whole series of them until we get down to the bottom. And then somewhere along the way, we'll moor our ship and we'll actually go in for a visit to the very interesting city of Béziers for a little city tour, perhaps some lunch or dinner, again, depending on the exact timing of our itinerary, which is always subject to some different things. So, but we also on this day, there's one more highlight to the day, which is the so-called Malpass tunnel. So the canal actually passes through a tunnel. It's not very long. It's only about 160 meters. But again, it's always a bit of a highlight for us to, toot the horn, because only one boat can pass through at a time through this tunnel that's on the canal. And then, of course, here as well, the Orb Aqueduct, which is another incredible masterpiece, because the boats go across the top of the bridge that goes over the same thing, the River Aude that passes underneath. So a lot of highlights on this day in Béziers. And then we will, on our final day on the canal, we will sail into Agde, and we will come out of the hilly countryside that characterizes most of the Languedoc region to the flat terrain that is adjacent to the Mediterranean Sea. In fact, we'll be at one point barely a mile away from the Mediterranean. And so it's quite flat landscape where we will sail into Agde, which will be our final port of call on the Canal du Midi. And we'll wander into town. In fact, if you look at this picture here, the canal is sort of towards the back, if you could see my mouse, and we walk into the center of Agde. And once again, it is really an amazing city. When I first visited, I was really taken aback. I wasn't expecting much, but it's got lots of narrow streets and little merchants, and it's great to wander around. And we'll dine at a terrific restaurant right on the shore of the river here, and it'll be a lovely last evening aboard the boat before next day, when we will disembark, grab all of our stuff, as it were, and we'll head to nearby Montpellier, which is not too far. It's about an hour away. And we'll probably take the train to Montpellier, as we did last time, because the train station is a stone's throw from where we park our boat, much like in Carcassonne. And then we'll head into Montpellier, which is once again, it's like Toulouse. It's a city that most people don't think about visiting in France, but I love Montpellier. There's an amazing square that you can see here, Place de la Comédie, and a classic French architecture, but with this Mediterranean influence, because again, we're in the south of France, an area that is so famous for wine. We'll have a couple of hours walking tour to familiarize ourselves with Montpellier, and then have a lovely last dinner in town before saying goodbye the following day. So this trip will end on the 29th of September next year. And for those interested in a longer trip through France, we have purposely positioned it immediately prior to our Lyon and Burgundy trip, which will take place from the 29th of September to the 8th of October. We'll have a separate webinar on that itinerary, but that takes in the highlights of Lyon, the second largest city in France, and also the food capital of France, a country that is obviously known for food and wine, and we'll also visit the wine regions of Burgundy as well. So this is a phenomenal trip. The two together, we had a number of people last year that did both trips. So again, we put them together so you can choose to do either just the Canal du Midi or both Canal du Midi and Burgundy. So just give you a few of the logistical details about this trip. Of course, everything is in the program itinerary. Again, the dates, 20th to the 29th of September, excuse me. Perfect time to go, the end of the season. We actually moved it 2 weeks earlier from last year, just because we found that the towns were getting a little too sleepy in October. So we figured we wanted to go at the best possible time, when the weather is still lovely, but the towns and villages along the way still have enough life to them. So that's why we've positioned it here at the end of September. So the prices that you can see here in Canadian dollars, which include, of course, your pre and post night hotel accommodation in Toulouse and Montpellier, accommodation aboard the boat, and lunches and dinners. Let's put it this way: we do say whether we have an included lunch or an included dinner, but by the time we gathered all of our treats from our tour along the Canal du Midi, we ended up with so much food that you're not going to be starving at any point on the trip. As I mentioned as well, wine, beer, soft drinks will include as well. So you really will have a pretty much all-inclusive experience of the Canal du Midi. The only thing that we need to arrange for you, of course, is your airfare, depending on where you're flying from, and your travel insurance, which we strongly recommend. Flying into France, into Toulouse, and again, we just give you this as an idea of what you can expect for airfare in September. But this is generally the range that we've been able to secure airfares for. So just to give you a sense for the overall budget for this trip. We are offering our early booking bonus here on this trip as well. So if you sign up early before the middle of October, you can knock a couple $100 off from the price. And that pretty much wraps it up. I think we'll take any questions now, Paula or Barb, just Paula now, that may have come in during the webinar. And let's see what people want to know.
Yes, please. I have a member who's asking if you can touch on any requirements with regards to packing for the boats.
Yeah, so the biggest thing to consider here is that the cabins are modest in size, right? I mean, they're about like 12 square meters, so it's like 120 square feet. They're quite small. So we suggest packing soft-sided, like duffel bag type luggage, or small. I mean, here's the thing: is it's informal. You don't need any fancy stuff, even though we'll eat in a couple of quite nice restaurants. But you don't need a lot of stuff along the way. So here, the idea is to pack light, pack layers. You never know how the weather can be. Our trip last year was, even though it was 2 weeks later, was quite warm. So if anything, we had a little bit too much in the way of clothes. But I think, again, because it's casual, we can, you don't need to, you don't need to pack too much.
Perfect. Can you touch, okay, well, you kind of did just touch on the weather, I guess, there.
Yeah, the weather, no, good question, though. The weather typically, and I say typically because there's nothing typical anymore. As I say, it's October and I'm in Croatia and it was 30 degrees on the weekend, which is not typical. But typically the weather in September and this time of the year in this part of France should be in the high teens to maybe the low 20s during the day. I say that when we went last year in the middle of October, it was more like low to mid 20s. But I would count on that. It could be a little bit cooler as well. The year before we went, the temperature sort of dropped down to even like 10 degrees at night. So call it 10 to 20 is what I would sort of pack and prepare for.
Perfect. I have a member here asking what the dates in May are, and I've got those up, which are May 16th to the 26th. And there, as Gordon mentioned, there is still availability. One of the boats is already full, but we do still have a couple cabins left on the other.
Still have a couple of cabins. And so that's a good time for me to just explain the difference. So essentially, the itinerary is the same, except that in the spring, we travel from south to north, or it's not really exactly south to north, but we travel from, we start in Montpellier, and then we begin the canal boat trip in Agde, and we go from Agde and we end in Carcassonne or in Toulouse. So we go I hate to say upstream and downstream because there is no up and downstream. But you're going inland as opposed to towards the Mediterranean in the spring, and you're doing the reverse on the way back. What's the difference? For all intents and purposes, none. The places that we stop at will mostly be the same, but they're always subject to a little bit of change because sometimes we go, oh, we're a little bit ahead of schedule. Let's stop in this town and wander around for a bit. Or oh, we're behind schedule. We're going to skip this town and go to the next village. It's all a little bit flexible, but the trips are otherwise identical. The weather in May is also lovely. It's a great time to visit as well. So it's similar. if anything, maybe a little warmer than September, but should be almost exactly the same.
Perfect. And Penny is asking if we have other trip combinations, specifically the Lyon and Burgundy one, in combination in May.
Yes, we do. We have in May, Lyon. No, sorry, May is Paula. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I was just looking it up. We have so many; it's hard to keep them all track or straight now.
So in May,
Provence.
for sure, yeah, we have Provence and the Côte d'Azur. So in May, immediately preceding this trip, you can do our Provence and Côte d'Azur. So this is a trip that begins in Nice. So we visit Nice and Forcalquier in the Haute-Provence, in the High Provence, and then near Avignon, we finish off at Saint-Rémy-de-Provence. So we do a 3-stop sojourn in Provence immediately before this trip, and then the Canal du Midi. So that's the other difference between May and October. May, it's Provence and Canal du Midi, and October, it's Canal du Midi, and sorry, excuse me, September, it's Canal du Midi and Lyon and Burgundy.
Perfect. Thank you. I also have a member here asking what's the information around biking? You touched on that we could be biking.
So yeah, so I mean, so bikes are available. We can rent bikes, and they're sort of ordinary trail bikes, if you will. They're not fancy. They're not, they're comfortable for riding short distances. And so we can organize those for the boat. Last year we had a bike on each boat, and actually nobody opted to use the bike except for myself to go and fetch croissants one morning. But it is a possibility. So if you are interested in biking, if it's like, oh, I'd really like to do that, you can do it almost at any time, because there is a bike path, walking path that follows the entire canal for the entire length of the canal. So if you say, hey, I want to do that, let us know, and we will organize a bike or 2 bikes, or, I mean, we could theoretically take bikes for everyone, but what we find is that, yeah, people are having such a good time on board that I think they just didn't get around to biking.
Wine and biking don't always go as well together.
Well,
I've learned.
yeah, that too.
But the option is there.
The option is there.
I love it. I think we've covered everything that's come in so far, the different combinations, cool. And thank you. Well,
obviously, if you do have questions, drop us a note, Paula, Barb. I say we've done this trip now, so we it's a lot of fun because it's a bit active. It's slow paced. It's little villages. And you feel like you're the only ones there in the end of September, because again, the main season is long past. Just like in May, the season it's really the very beginning of the season. And so, yeah, it's one of my favorite. I would go back every year and do it. So that's what I would say. So let us know. And otherwise, thanks for joining us. I hope you'll consider coming along with us on the Canal du Midi. We've got lots more webinars in store for you. So stay tuned for those. Check our newsletter out every week for all the upcoming webinars. Thanks for joining us, and have yourselves a good rest of the day.